Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Unique Items. Today we're going to be taking a look at another one of the Path of Exile 2 uniques, and this one is called Call of the Brotherhood. Call of the Brotherhood is a really interesting ring, and we're going to be talking about like the specific things you can do with it. But first off, let's just go over the stats. This one has been corrupted, so keep in mind that, well, you know, you can't like actually get 13 intelligence on this normally, so you would have to corrupt it to get the 13 intelligence. So this is a buff that you can potentially put on it, is an additional, like, implicit, essentially. But normally it only has a passive lightning resistance, which I'm not sure if the passive lightning resistance actually does vary, because it is based on the Topaz Ring. And if you take a look at the Topaz Ring, which I've got like a bunch of these in here, the Topaz Ring does have a varied amount of resistance on it, so I would assume that this ring could also potentially get the high tier, or rather the max implicit, which is 30% lightning res. In fact, it probably says that on there. Yes, it does. So you can get up to 30% lightning resistance on this. You can also get anywhere between 10 to 20 intelligence, which of course is going to be handy for putting on the spells that you need and getting you extra mana. It also has 25 to 35% increased mana regeneration rate, which is obviously also going to be nice for spamming your spells. And it has a 20 to 30% increased freeze buildup, which is going to be very helpful with the way that this ring works, because this ring is going to convert 100% of all lightning damage converted into cold damage. Now, this does exactly what it states. If you have an ability that has lightning damage, like for instance, let's use Plasma Blast, which is a ridiculous lightning damage ability, right? Converts 70% of all my physical damage into lightning, and it's going to allow me to get a relatively large amount of lightning damage, right? However, if I put this ring on, I can convert all of that lightning damage, that 24,015 lightning damage, to cold damage. So now you can see I'm now doing no more lightning damage, and I am instead doing entirely cold damage with this particular ability. So now I'm dishing out, what, 80,000 cold damage? I'm also using a rotating ability here, which means that when this rotates to cold, which it will eventually, you'll see I have 130,883 damage. It's a pretty crazy ability. And honestly, it's kind of a fun one to play around with, although it does have a kind of a long timer on it. Now, Call of the Brotherhood ring has some positives, and it also has some negatives. First off, being able to convert a lightning ability into cold is definitely a good thing. However, it comes with a negative of no longer being able to deal lightning damage at all, which also means that you're no longer able to get any of the lightning effects, like shocking or electrocuting and things like that, which have to do specifically with lightning damage. A lot of those effects are a lightning effect specific ability, right? And if you're not doing any lightning damage, you don't get that effect for your character. There are some ways around this, and there are some ways that you can potentially utilize this ring to its maximum benefit, and we're going to talk about those. One of the coolest things about this is that it does allow you to turn basically any spell into a cold spell that is a lightning spell. So if you have like specific lightning abilities that you like more than others, it's definitely going to be an interesting options for that, because it's going to give you the ability to obviously utilize those to your advantage. So let's go into the nitty-gritty here. So let's say you use this particular item on your character. When you're looking at your skill panel, like for instance, let me go ahead and grab a low tier skill gem here real quick, just so that I can pull this up. Let's do like, I think 13 is like the base level for everything, right? Well, that's a spirit gem. Alright, so when you're looking at your panel and you see abilities that are lightning abilities, like Galvanic Shards is 40% to lightning. We also have Storm Blast Bolts, which is 60% physical to lightning. You have Plasma Blast, which is 70% physical to lightning. If you're looking in your like bow tree, you've got Lightning Rod, which is 100% of physical to lightning, and so forth and so on. It doesn't really matter. Like, any of these abilities that are lightning abilities are now cold abilities. They no longer shock, they no longer electrocute, now they just simply freeze instead. Now, there are ways that you can potentially get the shocking ability back if you want to, but you will also lose the freezing ability in the process. And this has to do with things like the Three Dragons Mask. So the Three Dragon Mask will swap the effectiveness of each one of the effects to something else. So for instance, fire damage from hits now contributes to shock chance. Cold damage from hits now contributes to ignite chance, and lightning damage contributes to freeze buildup. This is the Three Dragons Mask. Now, this actually does mean that your cold damage no longer freezes, instead it ignites. Your lightning damage no longer shocks, instead it freezes. Your fire damage no longer ignites, now it just shocks, and so forth and so on. So this one has some positives and some negatives to it also. We'll talk about that later. The interesting thing here is that it does not benefit from any other bonuses. Like, for instance, let's say, for instance, you have a bonus that gives you lightning damage. And I can show this off relatively easily with this particular character, so I'm going to turn this guy around. And you'll notice that I'm currently switching to lightning. This is my lightning on elemental conflux. And lightning gives me a huge bonus to my lightning damage. So I have 38,905 while this is active. And then when it goes away, I go to 24,015 because it just swapped over to cold. In this particular case, when I'm utilizing the Ring of the Brotherhood, I will not get a bonus for when it is on the lightning portion. So this is the fire portion, which is currently 80,000 cold. Of course, I wouldn't be getting any damage bonus to that there. And then it switches over to the cold, and you can clearly see that I have 130,883 damage. However, when it switches over to the lightning, which we may have to wait a second for it to do this. There we go. So it's about to switch to lightning. You'll notice that I get no benefit to the cold damage whatsoever, because any bonus that you have that enhances lightning does not apply to the lightning before it is converted. It applies to the lightning after it is converted. In other words, there is no lightning for it to enhance. So if you had, say, like 100% enhanced lightning damage or something of that nature, it's not going to apply here because it's converting all the lightning into cold before any of that damage number effects, which means that cold damage bonuses specifically, or elemental damage bonuses specifically, are going to apply to the cold damage that it was converted to. So, as an example, if you had, say, like 5,000 lightning damage and 5,000 cold damage, and you had a bonus to lightning damage, which you would think would bring it up to 10,000, it doesn't do that. Instead, it just takes the 5,000, converts it directly into cold, and then only the cold bonuses are actually going to apply, or the elemental damage bonuses are going to apply to the cold specifically. So keep that in mind. Now, the really cool thing about this ring is that it really just allows you to utilize tons and tons of abilities as cold abilities that you might not otherwise, have thought about. Like shock burst rounds can potentially be a cold ability. So in the case of the crossbow, there's really no equivalent to some of these abilities. Like some of them just have their own unique effects. And so adding in the lightning or the cold into them, like for instance, there's no cold grenade. There is an explosive grenade, which dishes out fire. There is a voltaic grenade that dishes out lightning. There is a cluster grenade that dishes out fire. There is a gas grenade that dishes out poison. And there is a oil grenade that lights everything on fire with, its oiliness. But there's no cold grenade, right? So if you want a cold grenade, you can use this ring to convert voltaic grenade, which converts 80% of all physical damage into lightning, into a cold grenade. There are other ways that you can potentially achieve this, though, and I'm not entirely sure that this is the best way to go about this. For instance, I can add cold damage to any ability that I want. I don't have to have a cold ability. I can just simply focus on adding elemental damage to my attacks and cause pretty much any ability to do cold damage that is not a spell. Now, spells specifically, as far as I know, do not function in this same way. But as a character like, for instance, myself, you'll notice that I'm currently using, say, Explosive Grenade. Well, if we take a look at Explosive Grenade on my character, because I'm stacking cold damage, you'll see I have a relatively large amount of cold damage on a attack that is primarily fire. And when it switches over to the elemental complex for that, I end up with 5,011 cold damage. And this is because I'm stacking cold damage on my abilities. Now, eventually I moved away from stacking just cold damage, and I wanted to stack all the damage types. So I ended up stacking lightning damage, cold damage. I've got fire damage on some pieces of equipment. I'm utilizing basically every single element that I possibly can to get as much elemental damage as I can, because I'm building specifically a multi-elemental build where I can do massive amounts of damage in that way. And you can see that even my explosive grenade, which is a fire ability, is dishing out fire damage, cold damage, and lightning damage, as well as physical damage on top of that. So it is doing literally all of the above in terms of damage output, right? And this allows me to shock the target. It allows me to burn the target. It allows me to freeze the target, which is very, very fun, I gotta admit. And to give you like a brief look at it, let's go take a look at the let's go to waypoint real quick. Let's go to Act 3. And let's just go somewhere where there's tons of monsters like the infested barons. And I'll show you some examples of how you can potentially freeze targets with abilities that you probably shouldn't be able to freeze targets with. So, for example, if I utilize Voltaic Grenade is a lightning ability, or if I utilize Explosive Grenade, I'm going to get a freezing effect. So let's go ahead and use Voltaic. And as you can see, we got Shatters. We got Shatters because the monsters are freezing from a lightning grenade. So this is the kind of crazy thing that you could potentially do just by simply adding elements. Now, as another example, though, if I utilize this one to convert all of the elemental damage of my Voltaic Grenade into lightning, it will no longer shock targets. So instead, it is now only going to freeze. And this is definitely interesting, because now we have pure cold damage coming from a lightning ability. If you utilize the Three Dragons Mask, though, you can convert it so that lightning damage from hits contributes to freeze, cold damage from hits contributes to ignite, and so forth and so on. So you can swap it even further this way. So now, instead of freezing the targets, they will burn, as you can see. And so there are a lot of fun ways that you can potentially manipulate your character in these ways. And get some very interesting effects. There's also a pair of gloves that could potentially go very well with this, that allows you to convert all of your elemental damage into 33% of every single element. So for instance, let's say you were primarily fire damage, and you put these gloves on. It's going to take all of your damage, it's going to sum it up, and it's going to take 33%, turn it into cold, 33% turn it into fire, 33% and turn it into ice or lightning. And so you're going to have a pretty decent amount of multipliers there, like for like the ability to obviously burn things, the ability to freeze things, the ability to shock things. And I have those on this character right here, so let's take a look at those really quickly. Now, in the case of the Call of the Brotherhood Ring, it's going to still convert that percentage. So the funny thing here is that, like, if you wear these gloves with the Call of Brotherhood Ring, they give you 33% of all of your elemental damage converted to cold, 30% fire, 30% to lightning. The Call of Brotherhood Ring is converting all lightning into cold, which means that it's going to be 66% cold, 33% fire, because it will still convert all of your elemental damage into 3 elements, right? You will still get 33% cold, you will still get 33% fire, and then you will get 33% lightning, which will be immediately converted into cold, which means that the spread on this particular item will be 66% lightning, 33%, or 66% cold, 33% fire, which is kind of definitely very interesting. A lot of these unique items have some very interesting connotations as far as your builds are concerned. In my particular case, I'm utilizing these gloves with Frost Bomb, which allow me to have multiple elements tied to Frost Bomb. So in this particular case, I'm dishing out an equivalent almost amount of fire, cold, and lightning, and I'm burning, shocking, freezing all the monsters, and I'm getting multiple bonuses, of course, because I'm stacking into the multiple elemental elements, and so forth and so on, which can definitely help you out. So when you're thinking about the Call of the Brotherhood Ring, definitely think about it as something that has some pretty heavy positives, but also some pretty heavy negatives as well. You're going to lose the ability to shock targets. You're also... Sometimes you have to keep this in mind, too, because when you're looking at spells, a lot of the times spells have specific advantages. Like, for instance, they may gain a large amount of damage from shocking targets, or they may gain they may be designed around the idea of you know, like for instance, ball lightning here, you see it has 750% more chance to shock. So this one is designed around the shock chance, right? So if you convert ball lightning into cold, you lose that shock chance, and the entire like design of the item kind of falls apart because now you can no longer shock enemies with the ability. The same thing goes for the fire on the other side. Like if you have an ability that was designed to light things on fire, and now no longer you can light things on fire, well, it just doesn't really work very well. And you might be saying, well, what about like in the case of fire, if I convert fire to cold, shouldn't the ignite damage dish out cold damage? And the answer to that question is yes, it should. But because you're not doing fire damage, you can't actually ignite the target, which is part of the problem. And because you're not dishing out lightning damage, you can no longer shock the target, which is also part of the issue. And that's why I brought the Three Dragons helmet along to show you, because basically what you can do with the Three Dragons helmet is you can convert your build up from one element to another, allowing you to regain essentially what you've lost. So for instance, let's say I converted all of my damage to cold, which is something that you could potentially do with this ring, the Whisper Brotherhood ring, which is 100% of cold damage to lightning. Or actually, hold on, these gloves, the Blue Flame Bracers, which is 100% fire to cold. In this particular case, you wear this helmet, which will allow you to still ignite targets and gain the benefit of the ignite, which would then do cold damage, but you're no longer going to be able to get your freeze, which is unfortunate. I think that pretty much covers this ring. It's definitely a crazy one in terms of just like what it can do. I've also seen on the trade websites it tends to go for, you know, a pretty decent price. I think when I last checked it, although it could be going up, it might go down, never know. It was around 20 to 30 exalts, I think. So definitely a nice one to find as well in terms of value. So not bad. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining me when I'm doing these little videos. I also forgot to read the flavor text. It says, forged by three brothers so that they may recognize each other across any distance of time or travel. And as always, keep watching.